no reason why he shouldn't be getting more votes than everybody else. But I digress. Got to stop saying that.
Yeah.
Welcome to another edition of EverybodyHatesCleveland.com, the podcast. I'm your host, Jim Pete, back again, twice in 1 week, twice in 2 days. In real life, twice in 2 hours. Joined today by a new guest, still laying out like I need to paint him in the nude, Michael Hattery. He is clothed. Don't go to YouTube. How that for that? Oh gosh, now we're gonna get porn hits. Mike, how you doing?
Good. I'm looking good. But yeah, I think we're here to talk about the fantastic Mr. Lindor.
I mean, I think that his 1 year anniversary with the club has gone by fairly. I mean, I'm not saying that nobody was talking about it, but I mean, this is probably our best prospect since the 90s teams. His numbers.
Jim, I thought that was Zimmer. People were saying that was Zimmer.
Well,
I was told that was Zimmer, Jim. I disagree.
There are lots of other prospects that don't count, like Grady Sizemore. He doesn't count, even though his numbers were spectacular as well. But, we didn't draft him, so they don't count. But, anyways.
Okay.
Let's look at the numbers. It's been, 164 games since he's come up. He doesn't miss games, which is great. This fantastic shortstop defensively. And we don't have to look at the numbers to know what kind of defense the kid plays. But offensively, he's a 309 hitter with a 468 slugging, which is probably the shock. He's a 7.5 Fangraphs WAR hitter. This guy gets on base. He steals bases. He drives in runs. He scatters the ball across all fields. He hits line drives. He hits ground balls. He hits home runs. I mean, mention the word hyperbole. I hate to be this guy, but Francisco Lindor is everything that the Indians thought they were getting when they drafted him. And the funny thing is when they drafted him, took a lot of hits. Just your general thoughts, Mike, on the first year of Lindor before we start diving into the numbers a bit.
So he's been one of the 6 most valuable position players in the last calendar year.
Wait.
22 years old.
Are you saying for the Indians?
All of baseball.
All
baseball.
Yes.
He's a legit superstar, he's been a legit superstar for last year, which is a blast. It's interesting to me if you just look at his 2016 season, guys who he's outperformed using WAR as a measuring stick. Ian Kinsler, Bryce Harper, Evan Longoria, Paul Goldschmidt. His offense is something that I think people really foolishly expected was going to somehow regress into the ground. This is a guy who won the Affleck Home Run Derby in high school. This is a guy who handles the bat head very well. And I think he was so young that people didn't really understand that the power can still come for him. And he's shown a really solid ISO this year. I mean, it's close to league average. And him hitting 15 home runs at the shortstop position, Gold Glove defense, and a 300 average it's just kind of unfair.
He seems to me, Mike, and it's ironic that he's hitting third. I mentioned this in another podcast for Tribe Time Now the other day. If you would have mentioned the fact that Lindor was going to take the place of Brantley as the number 3 hitter a year ago when he first entered the big leagues, I think most people would have said, well, we're not sure about that offense. Now we're looking at a guy who has kind of slid into that 3 hole in the lineup in the same way that Brantley is. He's maybe not the prototypical 3 hitter in that. Yeah, I guess you want a guy who's gonna, hit 20 to 25 home runs. Oh wait, maybe he is that guy. But I think he's not the prototype that people had in mind. Nobody said he was going to be a 3 hitter a year ago. Even me, and I was higher on his offense than most people. So, is he the kind of hitter like Brantley who understands pitchers, one, where they're going to throw certain pitches, and a lot of hitters don't do that as well as Brantley, and changes what he's going to do at the plate based on situation. I think you have a lot of guys who don't have the ability to do that. You have guys like Manny Ramirez who just kind of innately knew how to do that. And then you have guys who purposely try to do that. And Brantley's one of them who really, over the past 5 years, Brantley's a guy who's molded his hitting into pitch count situations and situational hitting, where his power comes out of nowhere, which it means he needs to hit for power. Seems like Lindor's that guy. When he needs to hit a home run, he kind of swings for the fences. When he needs to drop a ball over the second baseman, as he did last night to drive in a run, that's what he does. Is this what makes him special offensively, Mike? Is that A, he has the ability to do that, and B, he's 22?
Yeah, I think he really, if you notice, especially from the left side of the plate, I think he picks his spots really well in terms of when he wants to pull the ball with authority. He does it in advantageous counts. He'll get in the 2-1 count. And this is something that we noticed with Brantley the fall before his power spike, the sort of August, September. We noticed that he was sort of finding ways to take advantage of pitchers in terms of, getting pitches in advantageous counts and then trying to pull the ball with authority. And so, Lindor does a fantastic job of using the whole field in non-advantageous counts and then finding advantageous counts to really pull the ball with authority. And I think that's something that, is going to sort of rise his home run total above what people thought, just because he's smart. He has a great barrel. He has great hand-eye skills, and those things that get better. And I think he's strengthened a little bit too. I mean, this is a guy who added 10 to 15 pounds of muscle last year while nobody paid attention. And he really hits the ball with significant authority for a middle infielder.
So what do you see right now as being his biggest strength on the offensive side of the plate? I mean, Adam consistently, and you've mentioned this a few times as well, talks about his barrel control, his ability to put the bat to the ball. And while his walk percentage isn't maybe as high as people would like to see it, is there a reason behind that? Is it the fact that he just has this innate ability to put the bat to the ball?
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't walk a lot. He doesn't strike out a lot. He just puts the ball in play a ton. His walk rate has climbed this year, which is really positive. I mean, it's gotten better and it's improved his offense. I mean, it's hard to criticize that. His K rate has declined. So, I think, what does he not do well offensively? I mean, he doesn't have plus power, but he has average-ish power. He has above-average bat-to-ball skills and contact authority. He has fantastic plate discipline, and he's speedy on the bases. He's a superstar. Like, everybody figured that out. That's what he is.
So,
yeah.
Mike, here's a question. I think I've asked you this before. I've asked everybody who I've ever podcasted and talked about Lindor with this before, and we always kind of nuance this answer. But I'm going to ask it again because I don't know. I don't know if is Francisco, I'm just asking the question, is Francisco Lindor the leader of this team? And I'm not just talking about the face of the team. Is he the guy? And I know everybody likes to talk about Kipnis, and I know everybody likes to talk about Brantley, and I know everybody likes to talk about Kluber for different reasons in different places. And even everybody likes to talk about Francona. But, when you talk about him, and it kind of sneaks up on you, defensively, he's the best defender on the team. Offensively, right now, he's not even arguably the best offensive player on the team. He's in the key role in the lineup. He's hitting third, which is kind of, while, of course, the leadoff guy is super important, and every part of the lineup is super important. That three guy kind of sets up your meat of the order. They put him there. And, oh my gosh, we were freaking out last year because they were putting him in the 2-hole. Now he's the 3-hitter. No one's saying a word. Funny how that works. So they keep doing, and defensively, like I said, I mean, this guy really kind of captains that defense. Is he the leader of the team at 22?
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, right? Like, there's no doubt he is.
Well, but I mean,
so here's the thing. Like, you have these quiet stars with Kluber and Brantley who people – I mean, this team had to sign a contract last year like an accountability contract. That's not a sign of leadership. And Kipnis is just some, frat house prick who runs his mouth every time he's producing. The rest of the team isn't. That's the only time you ever hear anything from Jason Kipnis. So no, Francisco Lindor is the leader of this team. And maybe if Kipnis wasn't sleeping it off so often and complaining, and like his, I don't know if you saw Meisel's piece, talking about Lindor, where Kipnis comes off as the snobby older brother who wishes he got as much press as Lindor. But, that's Kipnis is not the leader of this team. Brantley is too quiet and has been too removed this year to be the leader. And I think even Kluber in some ways, while he's, really important in sort of the rotational dynamic, I think it's pretty clear that the guy who makes this thing run is Francisco Lindor.
So when we talk about a guy like, here's another, just kind of throw this out there. So, the Indians draft took place just the other day, and let me start with Frazier. We talk about Clint Frazier in our last podcast, Mike, and I go back to this interview I saw earlier this year with Clint Frazier, and you'll see where I'm going with this in a second, where I want this to come back to Lindor, but I do want to make a parallel here. They talked to Clint Frazier about playing center field and about Bradley Zimmer kind of blocking his way as a pure center fielder because Zimmer gets a lot of those reps in the outfield. And Frazier's immediate response to that was, I'm thankful that every day I get to watch a guy like Zimmer play center field. I learn a lot just from watching him. And as I was watching him say that, I couldn't help but think that reminded me of Lindor. I think the one thing that I saw every day with Lindor when I was covering him at Carolina is that that's the answer that Lindor would have gave. Do you see Frazier as maybe having some of the same, we've seen the improvement, we've seen the IQ, and I'm starting to see a little bit of that off the field stuff too. Might they and Frazier, where in a couple of years we're going to be talking about him, or maybe at the tail end of this year we're going to be talking about him in the same vein as Lindor. And again, everybody hates hyperbole, but might the Indians have hit another home run with Clint Frazier?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he doesn't. To me, Frazier has a lot of upside, but he doesn't. Lindor could be a 6 or 7 WAR player this year. And nobody really has that. Like, I never want to say that somebody has that upside. Like, I think they could have hit the lotto with Frazier and
But a year ago, Mike, did we think Lindor had 7 WAR upside?
No, I mean, that's definitely a fair point. But I just defensively, Frazier has to be plus in right field and have really good offensive stats to make that work. And I'm just not sure. I'm not sure whether that's a thing. I'm not sure whether that's a possibility. I'm pretty optimistic about his ability to defend at average to above average in right, and maybe average in center. But who am I?
He's been pretty, and to be fair, I mean, he's not been great in center this year for Akron from everything that I've seen. These are just written down numbers, but it doesn't look like he's been all that great playing the field in center. So there's probably the real difference. But let me kind of pull this full circle. The Indians draft Will Benson this year as their number 1 pick. They recently signed him under slot, which is what everybody thought. We'll get into Benson here in a second, but first phone call from Benson is Francisco Lindor, and that struck me. I've been having this conversation about Lindor being the leader, and it's hard to commit to a 22-year-old who has just played 1 full season as being the leader of a team that has a lot of veterans on it. But doesn't that to you scream of not only is he visibly the leader by performance, but behind the scenes, this is a kid who is taking on the leadership role very visibly to the rest of the organization. Just making that phone call.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much signaled by that, and I don't want to, I'm just going to let that point sit because I think it's really strong, and I think that it's emblematic of a lot of what's going on in this organization. So I'll let that sit. I think it's insightful, and I don't have anything to add to it.
All right, let's talk a little, just real quick, Mike. I want to talk to you about Benson. in the Indians draft overall. We're not maybe as into it as much as we used to be when we used to cover it for Indians Baseball Insider. But, obviously you see them take Benson, a guy, a lot of, obviously plus powers, 6'5", 6'6", 230 pounds, young kid. The Indians drafted him, and immediately you had this. People take the baseball draft a lot like the NFL draft. Oh my gosh, he's got holes in his swing. Oh my gosh, he's going to hit 45 home runs. So let's pare back a little bit and let's talk a little bit about just what they did with this pick. They pick, an outfielder with power. That is clear. Obviously, holes in his swing, but I don't think the Indians worry too much about that. And they obviously went under slot for a reason. I don't want to talk about that. I just want to talk about your initial thoughts about Benson as an obvious guy who's going to take that they're going to handle in the same way that they handled Lindor, in the same way that they're handling Frazier. This is a 4 or 5 year project, as all prospects are in baseball. What are your thoughts on Benson about where he ultimately sits? Was it a good pick for the Indians? And doesn't he possess a lot of the same attributes that we've seen them kind of looking for in their players in the past year or two, especially under the Antonetti regime?
Yeah, I think we've covered the system for a while, and I think Dan Plesac, whose nephew was drafted by the Indians organization, said something that I think is really essential for this conversation. He said that, it's really clear to him that this is a great organization for his nephew to be drafted by because they have a great sort of legacy and they have a great, league-wide respect for their ability to develop players. I think the Indians' core competency in developing position players and pitchers recently has really improved. And I think, the process has really improved for the Indians, which is why we've seen a lot of draft success. We were seeing it, guys, slowly with Frazier moving through. We've seen it with Lindor, Kipnis, to a lesser extent Chisenhall, and a lot of other guys. I mean, the Indians are really starting to anchor their team via the draft, which has been huge. And I think a large part of it is scouting, but a large part of it's player development. And so when you really trust your player development system, then you can start gambling on guys who have huge upside. And I think that's what Will Benson is. Will Benson's a 6'6" frame, 200 plus pounds, tons of raw power, fantastic athlete who can probably play right field long term. I like the pick because I think there's tons of upside. The Indians system has proved to be really competent in developing these guys and helping usher them along at the right pace, and really work on the skills that they need to work on. So I think it's a great pick. And with it, they're able to get another really big time prep prospect in the second in Nolan Jones, who's very similar, who's very toolsy. I think has tons of upside, probably 2 of the 15 best prep prospects in the draft. And I think this is where the Indians are sort of saying, we bought a lot of upside and we trust our system to get these guys to the big leagues. And I like that approach.
And here's what I like the best about him. And, the attributes are clear. This is a top 50, 60 pick in the country. And again, I think in baseball, unless you're one of those 3 or 4 or 5 guys in the top, any draft Nick is going to tell you a lot of these guys are interchangeable. I think what impressed me the most, and this is where I really get excited, is most everybody has talked about how mature beyond his years that Will Benson is. And, this is a kid who was recruited by Duke, had signed a letter of intent. And I mean, you can say what you want about Duke University, but going there doesn't mean you're dumb. And it's not, it doesn't. It's so you've got this smart kid, and I'm just going to read a quote, and you've seen the quote too, Mike. And again, we're talking about a teenager, and this is the quote. And in a conference call right after the draft, this is what he said: "I'm very thankful the Indians drafted me." Now, he had me right there. You had me at being thankful that the Indians drafted you, but let's continue. But it doesn't mean anything if I don't impact the people that are in Cleveland and impact the world. Now, this is a kid. When I was 19, not what I was thinking, okay? My primary goal is to make baseball the #1 sport in America again. I think it's time for us to make it a here and now sport. Baseball's starting to move back up in the ranks, and I'm looking forward to impacting the game, so that's the case. So baseball becomes the #1 sport again. And again, I really love the idea of a kid looking beyond himself. And I think Lindor, as you see Lindor doing all of these things for underprivileged kids since he's been with the team, I think Will Benson, again, is a high IQ guy who thinks beyond just being a baseball player. And I think if you look at how the Indians modality, maybe this is a Brad Grant thing, maybe this is an Antonetti thing, maybe this is an organizational thing. But do you see the Indians really making waves? You mentioned Plesac, and really making waves with other prospects by going after the right kind of guy.
Yeah, I mean, who do you want to – if you're going to take a prep prospect, you want three things to be going your way. You want a prep prospect who's super toolsy, check. You want a prep prospect who has the motivation and the ethic to put in the work, to improving with your system, and you want to be really good at developing players. And you need a guy who's invested in becoming successful and becoming successful in your organization. And that's what Will Benson's quotes scream. That's what he sounds like. And that's, he's a very driven dude. So I think if you're going to take a prep prospect, those are the three things you want. And the Indians got them. So I couldn't be happier with this selection. I know some people have some criticism of it. My counter to that is I'm sorry if you think you can differentiate between the top 10 to 15 prep prospects. I think it's really hard to do. And historically, based on data research, major league teams have really struggled to differentiate between the top 10 to 15 prep prospects. So let's not act like the 9th best prep prospect versus missing on the 3rd is something that's a huge deal in this draft. It's not. The Indians found their guy. They took him, and they're a really good fit for him systemically. And they got Nolan Jones out of it too, which is a huge boon. So I'm really excited about the top of this draft.
Well, I think my favorite part about it too is as we're texting during the draft, and Steve Urbanek throws me a text. He doesn't follow the draft at all anymore, and he sends me this text. I like his smile as much as Andrew Wiggins, and it's funny. I started looking at the pictures of him walking on the stage and, putting his name up and, in this kind of ridiculous show that Major League Baseball puts on now for the draft to try to make it like the NFL draft. And, I couldn't help but think the same thing. I mean, this kid has this magnetic smile and this fantastic personality. He's from the inner city school in Atlanta. And, obviously has a lot of things going against him. And here's this kid, he has a chance to go to Duke, and now he's a major league pick, and he's got this massive smile on his face, and things could have gone a lot differently for him. And, as an educator in my real life, it's kind of fun to see a guy with that kind of presence and that kind of smile, as my friend Steve Urbanek likes to point out. But a good get for the Indians. And again, just kind of another domino in a bunch of drafts, I think, Mike, where the Indians have, maybe starting with that 2009 draft where they got Kipnis, a string of 7 or 8 years where the Indians have done really nice job kind of filling their system with really, really solid prospects. I mean, it's hard to evaluate this 2016 draft. And so we'll kind of end it here. How many years do you give it before we can start evaluating this draft? Because a lot of people want to evaluate it now. A lot of people want Benson to be with the club in 2018. Really, how long do you think this takes? When will we be able to look at Ben? Yeah. Say that again.
7 years sound right? 7
Yeah.
years.
Well, I mean, yeah. It brings me to Kyrie Irving and Tristan Thompson in 2011. There are a lot of people that wanted to crap on that. Now what? So it took LeBron, but now what? You take Kyrie first. It's been 5 years, and you got two-fifths of potentially an NBA championship team. So I don't know. In baseball, 7 to 10, really, because you never know, what player's going to click and when they're going to click at. So yeah, I agree. 7. Thinking about what year did they draft Lindor? Was it 11, 12?
I think 12 sound right.
So, I think maybe 6 or 7. now that you think back to it, because they really took their time with Lindor, and sometimes they don't do that. So, all right, we'll end things there, Mike. Francisco Lindor, is he going to get better, or is this the plateau? We'll end it there.
I'm not sure he can. Not sure he can get better.
45
MVP
home run, 45 home run. Well, there you go. I mean, seriously, ignore my 45 comment. I was being facetious, but he's legit MVP guy, right? I mean, if the Indians finish in first, and if the Indians are the favorite in the AL, should he not be the favorite to be the MVP if he continues the season he's having? Seriously?
I can't think of a reason why he shouldn't be one of the top 3 dudes in the MVP race if he continues and the Indians win the division.
I mean, as I heard lots of people telling me over the past 3 weeks, and again, I hate to keep bringing basketball into this, but if you're the best player on the best team in the NBA, you're the MVP. I mean, it doesn't mean you're the best player in the game. It just means you're the MVP that year. And I think you can make a case that there are little differences between this team and last year's team. The big difference to me, Francisco Lindor. I mean, if he's a 7-win player this year, that's a pretty big friggin' deal. MVP Lindor, Cy Young Salazar, let's get this done. Of course, it'd be nice if they actually make the All-Star team too. But, Kluber didn't, so who cares? All right, on that note, we're going to wrap things up. 2 podcasts in 1 week, maybe more. Who knows? It's early. I'm not podcasting on Father's Day, though. That's where I draw the line. Maybe I will. It's my day. I can do what I want. All right, Mike, anything you want? Anything you want to plug? I'll let you go first.
Read the list. This thing Jim and I write every day during the week. And then there's this other thing I wrote about pitcher defense optimization that I really liked writing. And I think you're going to see a corresponding piece soon on Fangraphs by August Fagerstrom of similar note. But I think it's something that's been a big part of the Indian success. And I'd say read. And finally, Jim wrote this sort of like innovative piece about how the Indians could try and attack their bullpen issues. That, as a thought piece, I think is incredibly enjoyable and is must read of anything we've written in the past week. And finally, Brian McPeak has just been pumping out fan journals about the Cavaliers, and I think those are an absolute blast. So if you get a chance, read all that. There's tons of good content up on the HC right now. There's nothing that isn't worth your time to read if you have a free hour on your Saturday or Sunday morning.
Well, and taking advantage of Brian McPeak, who was one of the best writers at the Cleveland Fan, would be please make sure you read his stuff. It's fantastic column-y stuff and covering the entire NBA Finals. And if you actually start at the beginning and follow the linear thought of where he's gone from game to game, you can see that actually he's predicated a lot of what's happened as we enter Game 7 tomorrow night. My simple plug is this. There are not many all-encompassing Cleveland independent sites out there. We are one. We are as local as you can get and as independent as you can get. Please read our site. We're going to stay independent as long as I can keep us going, and especially this podcast. We get a really good amount of listeners on this podcast. Please, please, please check us out on iTunes. Everybody hates Cleveland. Click a rating, give us a 5-star, and leave us a comment. It would be really neat for me if our podcast was the #1 rated local Cleveland podcast. That would be really cool. It's hard to go up against, I'm not going to say the man or the corporate sites, because there are a lot of good Cleveland sites out there that aren't independent anymore that I suggest you go to as well. But it would be really neat if the little site, the ironic Everybody Hates Cleveland, at least had the #1 podcast in the land. That would be really cool. So Mike and I are going to be around, and we got a ton of other people who will podcast, and I've kind of just assumed it's going to be Mike and my show over the coming days, months, years. But you never know who's going to pop in here and there. And we've had August on, we've had Hayden Grove on, we've had Paul Cousino on, we've had Adam Burke on, we've had just a ton of fantastic people from all the different websites, Danny Madden. And we're not going to stop doing that. So check out our podcast. Everybody Hates Cleveland. I'd prefer you go to iTunes and subscribe. please leave us a rating. Please leave us a comment. But you can hear us on SoundCloud. And, of course, you can find all our podcasts at our website, everybodyhatescleveland.com. Tons of content. Tons of content. Honestly, never in a million years at the beginning of this site did I think we'd have this much content over a short amount of time. So check it out. Leave comments. Let us know when you're there. We'll comment back for sure. All the pieces Mike said, check them all out. They're fantastic. And this is not just me being hype. Well, there might be a little bit of bias, but, it is our site. So everybodyhatescleveland.com. Hopefully tomorrow night, everybody will have a reason to hate us. Peace.